Welcome to Launchpad Labs Mega Brain Series, the webinar series which gives you an inside look into the collective wisdom of our developers, designers, and product managers, the heart and soul of LPL. Each episode introduces you to one of the product builders who will share their insights and expertise on a given topic, with the opportunity to ask them questions and pick their brain on the subject. In today's installment, we'll be hearing from Kate Weingart, an engineering manager who has been with us for over 5 years with a deep expertise in all things Ruby on Rails. She's going to share her knowledge and insight on using Hotwire. Take it away, Kate.
All right. Hi there. I'm excited to be here. As Ifat said, I'm going to share some knowledge about Hotwire. So let's get started. I'm not sure who is all familiar with Hotwire, but it's an amazing tool and framework about that does front-end Rails. At first, I wasn't sold on it, but as I learned more and became more comfortable with it, I think it could be pretty useful for projects when you just need a little bit more dynamic changes on a page without having to reach for React right away. I'm no expert and I still have much to learn on the topic, but after completing the Pragmatic Studio tutorial, I realized how valuable it is and wanted to share it with others. So here I am presenting it to you. I'll kind of start with a high-level intro, and we'll dive into some examples from the Pragmatic Studio tutorial. The tutorial does an excellent job of presenting diagrams, walking through code, so I highly recommend going through it to get more details. But I will be covering some of the content they provide in the presentation with hope that you kind of get the gist. So intro to Hotwire. Hotwire is a front-end framework suite that's integrated with Rails 7. You may have heard of it before, or maybe you've heard of Turbo. If you're feeling a little confused what these terms mean and how they differ, don't worry. In this presentation, I'll explain some of the high-level concepts of Hotwire. If you're interested in learning more, I can also direct you to the tutorial I've been talking about. So Hotwire is a suite of different frameworks, 2 of them being Turbo and Stimulus. Turbo uses different techniques to reduce the amount of JavaScript most web applications have to write. This is the most important part of Hotwire. Stimulus is a JavaScript framework when you absolutely need to use JavaScript. It sprinkles the client-side interactivity for your application when a server-side trip is just not justified. So diving a little bit deeper into Turbo, this is the heart of Hotwire. There are multiple parts of Turbo: Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and Turbo Native. Turbo Drive, each link will not trigger a full page reload on click. Instead, only the HTML inside the body tag will be replaced. Turbo Frames will decompose a page into pieces of content that can be updated individually. Before Turbo Frames, one page is one URL. Turbo Streams, same ideas of Turbo Frame, but broader scope, will deliver page changes over WebSocket or in response to form submissions using just HTML and a set of CRUD-like activities. Turbo Native targets the mobile devices. So let's look at that again in another diagram form. So you've got Hotwire. You've got Turbo, which is made up of Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames, Turbo Streams, and you've got Stimulus. Turbo makes up the foundation of Hotwire. So I sort of want to start talking about each of these pieces, and you can probably guess when you could potentially use each of them, but I wanted to dive into it again and again because it can be very confusing. So let's talk about this again. So Turbo Drive is activated by default in Rails 7. It comes out of the box, so you'd have to turn it off if you didn't want it. This accelerates link and form submissions so that there isn't a page reload. Turbo Frame, you need to target a specific HTML element to update or replace. Turbo Frame can update one DOM element, and it must be a Turbo Frame with a matching DOM ID. Turbo Stream need to change multiple DOM elements in different ways and need updates more frequently. Turbo Stream actions, there's a bunch of them: append, prepend, remove, replace, update before and after. And then Stimulus, if you need to reach for some JavaScript, this is the route to go. The moment you start having too many Stimulus controllers or it's too complicated, you probably should start thinking about if you should be reaching for React or something else. So when you need to work with some JavaScript to add client interactivity, use Stimulus. Inside of Turbo, you got Turbo Drive will satisfy most of your needs for fast performance by only replacing the page body when you click it. When you need additional responsibilities for updating parts of the page, you use Turbo Frames. And finally, in a few cases where you need to bring your application alive, such as sending live updates from the server, you're going to use Turbo Streams. So let's look at some of these examples from the Pragmatic Studio tutorial that I've been talking about. So they walk through building out a phishing app. So I'm going to pull that up here. Give me a second to kind of get it running. And I've got some images from the tutorial that I'm going to show you. All right. All right, to start, let's just look at quickly the modeling and what this looks like. So you've got some baits, users, and users and baits have tackle box items and fish catches, and then fish catches and users have likes. What the page really looks like when you look at the app, here it is. So I've gone fishing, I've got some baits. You can add and remove them into your tackle box. You've got your tackle box items, and here you can see them on the side. You can choose what bait you have on the left. You can log a catch. So let's say we want to do a catch. And then you can see the catches page, and you can filter your different catches. And then the activity page is going to show everyone's catches, and you can like them. I'm not going to get into the details here, but again, if you check out the tutorial, it talks about live updates and using some WebSockets for this. So first, I want to talk about Turbo Drive. So Turbo Drive, and again, these images are coming straight from the tutorial, and they really do a nice job of diving in. So Turbo Drive intercepts all clicks on anchor links to the same domain. When you click a link or submit a form, Turbo Drive prevents the browser from following the link. Changing the browser URL using the history API requests the new page and uses a fetch request, and then renders the response HTML by replacing that body and merging the head content. Same goes for the form submission. Turbo Drive converts form submissions into fetch requests, so your browser doesn't have to reload and the app feels much faster. So let's look at this a little bit in my browser. So again, Turbo Drive comes out of the box with Rails 7, but for this demo, I currently have it turned off. You can do that in the application.js. You can see here Turbo Session Drive is set to false. Okay, so I have it turned off right now. So when you click any of the nav items, you're going to have the actions cause a full page reload. So let's look at that. Let's look at the network tab. And if you click on the baits page, you'll see the GET request, full document. If you click on the tackle box, same thing, you're going to see a GET request for the tackle box items. You can see another request for the specific tackle box item that you are on. And every time you click, you can see that browser load. You can kind of see the flash as the browser is loading. We can go back. So now when the link is clicked, again, let's look at this diagram we have here. When the link is clicked, the browser's normal behavior is to send regular HTTP GET request. But when Turbo Drive intercepts link clicks and sends an async JavaScript request using fetch. To prevent a full page load, Turbo Drive automatically merges the head and replaces the body. So if the head hasn't changed, we don't have to reload that information. Replacing the body is going to be just much faster. Form submissions and posts are the same. So let's see that in action and turn Turbo Drive back on. Go back here, reload the baits page. You're going to get that first full load of the document. Now, when you click on the tackle box, you can see the async fetch request for the tackle box items, as well as the tackle box that you're on. Same when you're clicking the catches and the activity. And actually out of the box, if you click the back button, you'll see that there's actually a cache. You won't see any requests coming here. It didn't fetch any of the fish catches. So Turbo Drive is basically free. You don't have to do anything to get this working. This is great. If you don't have specific targets and reloading the entire body is fine for your application. But if you want to target specific sections of the page, that's where Turbo Frames is going to come into play. Let's go back here and look a little bit into Turbo Frames. The pages are divided independently into contexts called frames. Turbo captures link clicks and form submissions inside a frame, automatically updating the frame contents after receiving a response. This is useful if you want to target a specific HTML area that change without affecting the rest of the page. The response is much smaller than the full body. Unlike Turbo Drive, Turbo Frames allow you to limit that scope of the change to just that frame. So before adding Turbo Frames, if I added or removed a bait on the page, the entire body would be reloaded. However, if we aren't really interacting with any of the other baits, it doesn't really make sense to target the entire page. So instead, we put Turbo Frames around each of the baits and only update the one we are clicking on. So each bait goes into its own Turbo Frame with a unique ID. Any actions will be scoped to that frame. So when add is clicked, it will send a request to the create action of the controller. The response should then include a Turbo Frame tag here with the same ID. This will replace the Turbo Frame with a new response. Same thing happens if it is destroyed. So let's look at what this looks like in the code. So right now, if you go to the baits page, the app knows if the bait's in your tackle box. And there's either an add button or a remove button, depending on if it is or not. If you add an item, we want that button to change so that the bait partial, you'll see this Turbo Frame tag. So let's just look at what this looks like from the HTML. So you can see each of these baits are in Turbo Frames with specific IDs. So now, if we reload, well, let's look at the bait reel here, right here first. So you can see there's a Turbo Frame tag with that specific ID for the bait. So that's what's going to show up here. We've got a Turbo Frame tag with the bait. So we're going to reload this page, look at the network tab. And if I add or remove, it should only be updating that Turbo Frame. So let's add the fact. You can see the response here. And when I look at the actual response, this is where you're going to see only the Turbo Frame that needs to be updated. It's no longer the entire body being replaced on the page. I can remove it, and the same thing should be there, the Turbo Frame with the updated content for HTML. There's no redirect and no full page reloads. So that's great, Turbo Frames. So when we want to add and remove a bait, it updates the frame right now for the bait with a new count. However, we also need to update the tackle box item at the top in the navigation. So we need a way to dynamically update multiple parts of the page. And this is where Turbo Streams is going to come into play. So with that, I'm going to close into a separate part and show you what Turbo Streams looks like. Right, and back in. All right, so let's take a look at what Turbo Streams looks like. We want to change two parts of the page now. So we generate a response with two Turbo Stream elements. These are basically instructions for modifying the page. They work using an action, a target, and a template. The action can be replace, update, append, prepend, remove, before and after. So in this, we want to update the tackle box item count. So action is update. The target is the ID of the closing element. So you got tackle box items count. The template wraps the content that will update the target. So for this count, it's just a number. For the second Turbo Stream, we want to replace the entire bait frame. So the action is replace. The target is the ID of the target to replace, so bait 1, and the template wraps the content that will replace the target. This case, it's the Turbo Frame of the bait. Because Turbo Streams is just HTML, we render like normal HTML. Use a template, browser doesn't know what to do with that. However, Hotwire includes client-side JavaScript that knows how to carry out instructions for updating the DOM. Using Turbo Streams, we can respond to the form submission. So let's look a little bit into the code. So by default, Rails is going to look for a create view. So we create a create view with a Turbo Stream response instead of HTML, you're going to see a Turbo Stream ERB. Rails recognizes this format. And here you can see the two turbo streams that we were talking about, the replace for the bait and the update for the tackle box item. The first argument is the target ID, and the second argument is what we replace it with. So this here is the bait partial. Again, the first element is the target ID, so tackle box items count, and the second is what to replace it with, so the new tackle box item count. Streams do not need to target frames, they can just target divs with IDs. So let's look at this on the page. So now, if you go to your tackle box, let's click this, you'll see the total count here. And if we remove something, you'll see the count number also updates and the button updated in the frame. So you'll see two different areas updating at the same time, and those are the responses, should show the two streams. So let's look at the response. There's the bait partial, and here's that tackle box item count. Okay, so that's a lot of Turbo. Let's talk about Stimulus a little bit. So Stimulus gives us a way to connect JavaScript to any unique elements on the page. So for us, we're going to do this for the search page so that it starts searching while the user is typing. So let's go look at what Stimulus is. Stimulus gives us a way to connect JavaScript to any unique elements on the page. So we're going to create a form controller that will have a submit action. And then we will add a data controller to that form that we want to trigger that action. Controllers are initialized once, connected to the DOM element, and then is disconnected. The controller is connected and disconnected as actions are hit. So in the code itself, you should be able to see the form controller that we've created. And then here you see the form controller, and in the baits index page, you're going to see the form. And here's where we're going to add the data and the action and the controller. So we've got controller is the form controller. It's going to hit the action, input, form, it's going to submit. So whenever there is an input action, it will call the submit action of the form controller. In the controller, you can see that form will be submitted. So here you can see it's initialized and then the submit method here. So let's reload our page and start looking at what that looks like. So if I start typing in here, fat wrap, as I start typing, you'll see over here that the submit action is called and there's a fetch request. And in here you can see what it's fetching. The submit action is called every time the submit action is called every time the action is hit, and form is auto submitting. So that is a little bit of how you can add some stimulus to do some JavaScript quickly in a app that you have. So that's kind of where I'm going to stop for today. But I definitely think people should check out the full tutorial where they go a lot deeper into the broadcasting live updates. They go a lot deeper into the turbo, into stimulus, and all of these concepts in general. And you'll be able to see the code and really dive into it, what I've been showing here. But there's just a lot of benefit here that I think that it'd be great for you to dive in a little bit more. And I will hand it back to Yvonne.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. That was a fantastic presentation. Thank you for walking us through each of those concepts. So we have some time now for some questions from the audience, and I've got a few ready for you here. So the first question is, what are some ways I might optimize an existing code base using Hotwire? And do you have any tips or advice for doing so?
Yeah, sure. This is tough, right? You go into an existing code and like how do you kind of start? So I'd identify parts of your code base that could benefit the most from Hotwire's reactive capabilities. So try to find sections of your application that frequently require a page refresh. That's like number one. Those are great candidates to look at if you can use Hotwire. Use turbo streams. Turbo streams are core features that allow you to update specific parts of the page, multiple parts of the page, without having to do that reload for the entire page. And I would just say start small. Don't try to implement Hotwire across your entire code base at once. Maybe start with a small feature or a section first.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. All right, we've got another question here. Can these frameworks or patterns be overused, do you think? And if so, how so?
I mean, yeah, I think like any technology, it can be overused. As I explained a bit in the presentation, if you find yourself writing a lot of controllers with a lot of complexity, you likely should consider an alternative solution. Also, like turbo streams is great, but if you use too much, it can really make your code harder to maintain and debug. And in general, if there's too many updates on a page, it could even impact a user experience. So definitely like be careful with the things that you're changing and make sure that you actually should be using Turbo in those instances.
Totally. Yeah, I'm hearing, avoid spaghetti code, and I think that's some advice we can all take. All right, and we've got time for one more here. All right, the last one is, what is Hotwire's take on using Rails apps for mobile now that they're trying to integrate JavaScript a little more natively? Do they have a solution for that?
Yeah, there's definitely tools out there. Hotwire itself focuses on obviously providing like fast and reactive experience regardless of the platform. And so they do have a few solutions for mobile. They have a couple tools. It's Turbo Native iOS and Turbo Native Android. This extends the capabilities of Hotwire to mobile applications by providing the native components for different platforms. So basically, if you want to build a Turbo Native iOS app, you would typically start by building a web application using Hotwire and then add the necessary native components and features using Turbo Native iOS. The resulting code base typically could be just a single code base that's shared between the web and the iOS application.
Nice. It sounds like Hotwire's providing a lot of tools just to honestly make it easier on developers. So that's really great to hear.
Absolutely.
Very nice. Well, those are all the questions we had. So again, we want to thank you so much for your time, Kate, and for sharing with us the power of Hotwire and how developers can go ahead and learn how to use those tools and practice them and apply them in their own code base.
Yeah, great to be here.
With that, that concludes this edition of Launchpad Labs Mega Brain series. Follow us on social media to stay updated about upcoming episodes and other think pieces from our team. We'll catch you next time.